Hello, everyone. My name is Professor Khaleed. Welcome back to Journey Through the Colonial Archives. Last episode, we examined the Powell Memo, 8 pages written in secret in 1971 that became the blueprint for corporate America's capture of democratic institutions. Today, we go back much further, to a book written in Portugal in 1453 that most people have never heard of, a book that may be the single most consequential document in the history of anti-black racism. Before there were slave ships, there was this book. Before there were papal bulls authorizing enslavement, there was this book. Before there was a transatlantic slave trade, there was this book. This is the story of Zurara's Chronicle of Guinea. And once you understand what it argued and why it was written, you will understand where the idea of racial hierarchy actually came from. His name was Gomes Eanes de Zurara, court chronicler to King Alfonso V of Portugal. His job was to record and glorify the deeds of the Portuguese crown. And in 1453, the crown needed glorifying, because what Portugal had been doing on the coast of West Africa since 1441 required justification. Portuguese sailors had been conducting systematic raids on West African communities, capturing men, women, and children, and bringing them back to Portugal as enslaved laborers. King Alfonso needed a story, not just a legal justification. That would come later from the Pope. He needed a moral and intellectual argument for why this was acceptable, why these particular human beings could be treated this way. He commissioned Zurara to write that story. The result was the Chronicle dos Feitos da Guinea, the Chronicle of the Discovery and Conquest of Guinea, the first European book written about Africans in the modern era, and it introduced ideas that would echo through 6 centuries of Western thought. Zurara described the Africans seized in Portuguese raids, their appearance, their customs, their spiritual condition, which he characterized as one of darkness and ignorance, far from the light of Christian civilization. And then he made the argument that would become the foundational justification for the entire transatlantic slave trade. He argued that capturing these people and bringing them to Europe was not cruelty. It was mercy. It was salvation. By removing Africans from their homeland and placing them under Christian authority, Portugal was giving them the gift of civilization and the possibility of eternal life. Enslavement as humanitarian mission, predation as providence, the same logic that would appear in the papal bulls 2 years later, the same logic that would appear in the Berlin Conference 4 centuries later, the same logic that still surfaces today whenever extraction is dressed in the language of development and aid. As historian Ibram Kendi documents in Stampede from the beginning, Zurara's chronicle did something no previous European document had done. It created the idea of the African as a category, a distinct, identifiable type of human being whose condition justified a distinct systematic treatment. Before Zurara, slavery was not specifically racial. Europeans had enslaved people of many origins. The condition of the enslaved was determined by conquest, not by appearance. Zurara changed that by focusing sustained literary attention on sub-Saharan Africans specifically and arguing that their condition justified their enslavement specifically. He built the intellectual architecture for race-based slavery. He gave European civilization a way to look at a black person and see not a human being of equal standing, but a category of being for whom different rules applied. That idea, once written down and given the authority of royal patronage, proved extraordinarily durable. It traveled, it was read, it shaped how Portuguese, Spanish, Dutch, British, and French colonizers understood the people they encountered and enslaved across the following centuries. One book, written by one court chronicler, commissioned by one king in 1453. 2 years after Zurara completed his chronicle, Pope Nicholas V issued Romanus Pontifex, formally authorizing the enslavement of Africans. The theological argument Nicholas V made drew directly on the framework Zurara had established: Africans as heathens, enslavement as salvation, predation as providence. The idea preceded the law. It always does. By the time the transatlantic slave trade reached its peak in the 18th century, Zurara's foundational argument had been elaborated and institutionalized across European intellectual life, in legal codes, scientific treatises, and philosophical works. The idea that African people constituted a separate and lesser category of humanity had become so embedded in Western thought that most people who held it no longer knew where it came from. They did not know about Zurara. They did not know about the commission from King Alfonso. They did not know about the raids on the West African coast that needed a story told about them. Now you know. The Chronicle of Guinea is not freely available in English translation. It exists primarily in Portuguese archives and scholarly editions. That difficulty of access is itself part of the story. The foundational document of anti-black racism has been allowed to remain obscure, while the racism it generated has been allowed to appear as if it emerged naturally from nowhere. It did not emerge from nowhere. It was commissioned. It was written. It was filed in the archive. You cannot change what you cannot see. Our next episode examines the papal bulls of 1452 and 1455, the legal and theological instruments that transformed Zurara's argument into the law of the Western world. The idea became the document. The document became the law. The law became the world we live in. I'm Professor Khaleed. Join me next time as we continue our journey through the colonial archives.